Bone Tomahawk, a fan novelization by Jeremy Terry, based on the screenplay by S. Craig Zoller, read by the author. Prologue. What happened at the Circle of Rock and Bone? The three travelers never had a chance. The first two died without a struggle, and the last came awake far too late to make a difference. Purvis already had one hand over the man's mouth and a knife sawing at his throat. Warm blood flowed over his dirty hands from the man's gaping neck and pooled in the dry, dusty dirt under his head. The man kicked, tried to claw Purvis's hand free. Purvis leaned all of his weight on the poor bastard and waited until the light vanished from his eyes and the scent of urine and feces filled the air. "Why do they always wet themselves?" Purvis asked with a grimace as he wiped the blade of his knife on the dead man's clothes and stood. Buddy, his older, rotund companion, rolled his eyes at the younger brigand before motioning with his own blooded blade. "Just get to the task." Purvis scratched his stubbly chin, watching as Buddy crossed the clearing to pick up a green valise. He turned, taking in the strange valley they found themselves in. The hills on either side were sparsely covered in sagebrush and other short foliage, the hill's tops barely rising to the height of a full-grown pine tree. More brush covered the path into this place at one end and the way out farther on, but the center had been cleared by savage hands. Indians, Purvis thought. Red devils. He'd seen his share of Indian burial grounds during his ramblings, but never one quite like this. Strange symbols had been erected in stone alongside mounds that presumably covered their honored ancestors. All of this was enclosed in a stone circle. Purvis looked to the entrance where a stunted tree held a strange effigy made of a human skull that had been cracked open. Sticks and stones filled the mouth and empty space where the brain had once been. Surely the savages had not done that to one of their own. Was it a warning to passerby? Keep out or this will happen to you? He glanced to the three dead travelers, wondering what madness had overtaken them to convince them that this was a suitable place to take a rest. He saw Buddy glaring at him from the corner of his eye and sighed. The old man was good at their work, a dependable old hand, but he could be a slave driver. Purvis walked over to a nearby tree where a leather saddlebag swung in the breeze. He lifted it, grew momentarily excited at the weight, and then felt his hopes dashed as he looked inside. "They got books," he said, spitting in the dirt at his feet. "Shake 'em out," Buddy replied as he pulled a carved wooden box from the valise and opened it. "See if they got money hidden between the pages." Purvis snorted. "It won't be listed in the table of contents?" "Save them jokes nobody likes for the campfire," Buddy said, opening the box and pulling out three felt toothbrushes with ivory handles. He tilted his head back and rubbed thoughtfully at his few remaining teeth. "Fancy," Buddy said. Purvis shrugged, running his tongue across his own mossy teeth. He'd never much understood the point of a toothbrush. He started pulling the books out one at a time and shaking their pages over the ground to see if anything fell out. There was nothing. "Worthless," he said. He tossed the books into the fire and turned in time to see one of the dead men he'd cut pulling a shooting iron from his belt. "Buddy!" The old man was much faster than his age and bulk indicated. In a flash, Buddy had his booted foot on the man's wrist, pinning the revolver to the ground. The man pulled the trigger, sending 3 bullets into the dirt behind Buddy. The highwayman leaned down, picked up a large rock, and brought it down on the man's head, smashing his face in. His body spasmed for a few seconds and then grew still. "You didn't cut him deep enough," Buddy said as he pocketed the man's gun and stood up. Purvis flushed, pointing at the moist red soil beneath the corpse. "He had a lot of blood, an unusual amount." "He's got the same amount as everybody else," Buddy said with a shake of his head. "There are 16 major veins in the neck, and you gotta be sure to cut through them all." Purvis scoffed. "There aren't 16. "An acquaintance of my uncle was once a doctor, and that's what he said," Buddy replied, motioning with his hand. "Now, get back to the task." Purvis nodded, pulled another book from the saddlebag, and found it as empty as the first several. Sighing, he tossed it in the fire to burn with the others. "Don't throw no Bibles in there," Buddy said over his shoulder. "I know," Purvis said as he pulled a math textbook from the bag. "It's bad luck to burn one. Besides, you can always sell a Bible to some idiot." "You gotta love a gullible idiot," Buddy agreed as he opened the nearest dead man's bedroll and found a small bag that clinked when he lifted it. "I heard money," Purvis said. Buddy waved this away as he dropped the bag into the valise he draped over his shoulder. "You just shake those books." Purvis pulled a final book from the saddlebag and shook it, startled to find that a few bills were concealed inside. He bent to pick them up and then froze as a faint sound reached his ears. He quickly gathered the fallen money and stood. "Buddy, I hear horses." Buddy stopped what he was doing and walked over to the younger man's side. "You certain?" "Positively. Just listen." The two men grew silent, straining their ears. A moment later, the faint sound of hoofbeats filled the valley, growing louder by the second. "This is cause of all them damn gunshots," Buddy hissed, spitting into the campfire. "A bat in China could have heard that." Purvis took a step back, fear tightening his chest. "That's a full gallop." Buddy looked around the valley and then turned around. He pointed to the far end of the clearing where the path led deeper into the valley. "Come on. We need to get up in them rocks and hide." The old man took the lead, and Purvis followed quickly across the stone circle and into the defile on the other side. The valley's walls were much closer there, rising nearly straight up on either side of the worn path. They turned a corner, and the trail rose steeply before them. A minute later, they were at the top of a rise, looking back down on the burial ground and the three dead men there. A dust cloud colored the afternoon sky in the distance. 15 minutes till they get to the clearing," Purvis said, pointing. They weren't far enough away, and they were running out of time. Buddy waved the younger brigand on. "Scurry." The narrow trail descended between the rock walls, casting the two men in deep shadow. They reached the bottom of the draw, where the trail widened and pressed on. "Up there," Buddy said, pointing to a large collection of boulders on the left hillside. "We got to get up there. That will give us the perfect place to hide and ambush them that follow us should we need to." "It's too steep," Purvis said. "Keep going. Hurry up." Buddy spat again, and they moved on around another turn. Purvis was just about to complain when an eerie whistle unlike anything he had heard before pierced the air, echoing along the valley. Both men stopped in their tracks. "You hear that?" Purvis asked nervously. "It was a gust," Buddy replied. "Just a gust of wind, nothing more." "That was a real musical gust," Purvis said. The old man squared his shoulders and leaned his head forward, his way of challenging another person. "And?" Purvis refused to be cowed. "It's ominous." Buddy turned back to the path. "This ain't the time for womanly imaginings." "Womanly imaginings?" Purvis ground his teeth, his fingers itching to reach for his gun, but he held back. One more shot would certainly spell their doom, with the posse bearing down on the valley. They rounded another bend and came to a place where two cliff faces joined, forming a short cave. Several large skulls had been inserted into the earth around the opening, and they stared out with empty eyes. Buddy drew the dead man's revolver from his pocket and brandished it for the frightened man to see. "We got permission." "Permission my ass," Purvis muttered under his breath, following in step behind the old man regardless. They passed into the tunnel, their footfalls rebounding off the walls, seeming to multiply until it sounded like 10 men ran ahead and behind them. "Is all that noise just us, or are we being tracked?" Purvis asked. Buddy shook his head. "More womanly megrims. Keep moving." They came to a sharp bend in the tunnel, passed around, and came out into blinding sunlight. Purvis covered his eyes, confused. "I thought the sun was in the other direction." Buddy turned in a circle, looking around them. "Well, it's over there now." Purvis blinked the sun glare clear and took in their surroundings. They'd come out of the cave into a wide open area covered in knee-high brush and more stone. A forest of totems made of scavenged wood and human bones grew on either side of the path that led straight ahead into the distance. "That's where we're going," Buddy said, pointing with the barrel of his pistol. "Past this place and deeper in." A creeping dread filled Purvis, and he turned around frantically, searching the hills on either side. Hostile eyes watched them. He could feel their gaze on his skin. "Maybe we shouldn't pass through a place like this. Maybe we should turn back and find another path." Buddy rolled his eyes. "This place ain't magical. It's only special to a bunch of godless savages. It means nothing to civilized men." Buddy scratched his crotch with the barrel of his gun and spit a wad of phlegm into the dirt to emphasize how civilized he was. He hiked up the valise higher on his shoulder and stepped down the path into the field of totems. Purvis tried to will his legs to move, but found that his body would no longer obey his mind. He scented the earth like a frightened deer, smelled creosote, alkaline dirt, and a hint of what might have been unwashed bodies. "Screw this, Buddy," he called out. "I'm telling you that something ain't right here. A jail on fire would be a safer place to be." The old man turned back to look at the young highwayman in exasperation. "It's better than sitting in that damn gulch, riders coming from one way and savages coming from the other, and us stuck between. You want to turn back? Then go." Purvis looked behind him at the dark tunnel and then back to the impatient fat man. It seemed an impossible choice. He couldn't go back through there alone, and yet he felt unable to go forward. Was he doomed to stand for the rest of eternity on that one barren plot of God-forsaken earth? "Piss on you," Buddy said. He turned back around, and then both men went rigid as the eerie whistle was repeated, only much closer now. Purvis drew his own revolver and aimed it at the hills around them. "If that was a gust, it learned an instrument." "Mayhaps so," Buddy said, his voice shaking slightly. He cocked his revolver's hammer back and started forward, trying to look everywhere at once. "Listen clear. We are passing through, no matter what. You hear?" The twang of a bowstring thrummed through the valley, and Buddy loosed a gagging cry. Purvis looked and saw the shaft of an arrow sticking out of the old man's neck. "Buddy!" Purvis cried. He wheeled about, firing his gun wildly into the brush around them. Buddy gagged, reached up, and pulled the arrow from his throat. The head was fashioned from a bird's skull. He dropped the arrow to the ground at his feet, tried to turn around, and fell heavily in the undergrowth. He held out his bloody hand to Purvis, begging for help. Purvis raised his foot to take a step, and then 3 more whistles rang out. They must be right on top of them. Purvis would see them any second. The younger man locked eyes with the elder for a moment, and then shook his head. "I'm sorry," Purvis called back as he turned and ran towards the cave and whatever lay beyond it. Anything would be better than facing whatever haunted that valley of death. The last thing he heard before passing into the dark was the sound of heavy footsteps and Buddy grunting as something chopped his stomach open, spilling his intestines into the dirt. Chapter 1. Bright Hope. Night had fallen over the collection of squat homes and false-fronted stores that lined the main street of the small town, but it seemed warm and inviting for all that. Orange candle and lantern light shone from windows here and there along the well-packed dirt track, bastions of civilization in the still mostly uncivilized American West. The wind blew leaves from a tree. They floated down past a hand-painted sign that named the town Bright Hope, population 268. A slightly stooped shadow moved along a worn path his old feet had trodden many times before over the past several years since his wife had passed. He topped a short rise and leaned against a tree trunk to catch his breath. Another shadow moved amongst the deeper ones below him, and he followed it with his still keen eyes. The shadow passed through a beam of light cast from a dwelling window, and he saw his face for a brief second. It was scruffy and haggard, the very visage of an untrustworthy vagabond if he had ever laid eyes on one. The stranger moved from the light and paused to stoop under a tree in the home's yard, and he began to dig. He emptied the hole quickly, tossed a saddlebag inside, and covered it back up before standing and brushing his grimy hands off on his equally begrimed jeans. Curious, thought the old man. Arthur O'Dwyer sat brooding on his couch in his home on the far side of town, trying to read a newspaper while his wife Samantha busied herself in the kitchen. He was handsome, his sun-baked skin tan and smooth, his freshly cut hair smoothed back. He shifted his weight and winced as sharp pain lanced up his right leg that was propped up on a settee in front of the couch. He glanced around the paper at the bothersome swollen limb with its bandaged and splinted calf and wished he had something more substantial than a newspaper at hand to throw. "Would you like some coffee?" Samantha called from the kitchen. "No reason to stay up," Arthur grunted, turning the page. "The more sleeping I do, the quicker autumn will get here." A pot slammed down on the iron stove and he grimaced. He'd done it now. He put the paper to the side and tried to smile as his beautiful young wife appeared in the doorway, her petite hands on her hips and her blue eyes flashing with anger. "Arthur O'Dwyer," she said, her cheeks turning red as the dress she wore. He couldn't help but grin. "You look real pretty when you're upset." Her frown deepened. "This isn't the time for compliments." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, lowering his head. "Tell me," she said, taking a step closer, her anger a palpable thing, "do you intend to sit and sulk for the next 12 weeks? This got a rise out of him, and Arthur sat up straighter, wincing again as his broken leg pained him. "What do you want me to—" She cut him off with a shake of her hand, her eyes drifting to his injury. "I advised you not to work on the roof during a storm, but you went up regardless because you had a notion to get things done. But there's no reason to go over that again." "Didn't you just?" he asked. "So, is this your intention?" she asked, ignoring his question. He looked away from her, scanning the sitting room for anything that might help him, and seeing nothing. "Is what my intention?" "To sulk for 12 weeks. Arthur looked back to her, feeling like a child being scolded by his mother for whistling in church. "I'm not sulking, I'm sour." "Don't dodge," she warned, her gaze falling on the newspaper resting on the couch. "And please remove that paper before the ink stains the cushions." He moved the paper to the floor and then looked back at her. "I moved cattle all over the map with all sorts of crews, from terrible to worse, to get this position. You know all that I've done. This was the big payoff, and now I'm stuck." Samantha's expression softened as she brushed wrinkles from her dress. "I understand how disappointing this is. Lots of guys never get to be foreman," he continued, "and when I finally do, this happens." She crossed the room and lowered herself onto the couch beside him, putting a small hand on his shoulder. "The crew will be gone until autumn, and you are here." "I know the situation," he said crossly. She squeezed his shoulder. "With me. You are here with me for a longer duration than any time since we were married. Can't you see that it's not all bad?" Arthur met her gaze, feeling like a damn fool for hurting her. He took her hand and kissed it. "Of course I can. And not just 'cause you're prettier than most cows." Her eyes went wide. "Most? You never saw Jessica," he said with a laugh. John Bruder walked through the Learned Goat's front door and paused to wipe the dirt from his new boots. He was 40, remarkably handsome, wore his black hair slicked back, and sported an immaculately trimmed mustache over amused lips. With his gray suit, white hat, and silver-topped cane, he was the best-dressed man in the town of Brighthope. He doffed his hat to Clarence, the bartender, as he approached, barely sparing the black man sweeping the floor and the old man asleep at the piano a second glance. "Good evening, Mr. Bruder," Clarence said as he finished wiping his stein clean. "Good evening," Bruder said, leaning against the bar. "It's like a church in here, though it lacks even pious women." "All the cattlemen rode out yesterday, taking much of the liveliness with them," Clarence responded. He nodded towards the sleeping man. "Why don't you patronage the man at the pianoforte and enliven things?" Bruder favored the bald man for a moment and then walked over. He paused by the piano to read the sign that leaned against the front. 1 song, 3 cents. 2 songs, 6 cents. 3 songs, 10 cents. Bruder cleared his throat. "Pardon me." "Good evening," the old man answered, without lifting his head from the piano. "If 1 song costs 3 cents, why do 3 songs cost a dime?" The old man shrugged. "That's the rate." "Shouldn't the price per song get cheaper when more are commissioned?" Bruder asked. "I get tired after 2, said the old man, "so the 3rd costs extra." Bruder's brow furrowed. "Do 4 songs cost $1 then?" The old man waved his hand dismissively. "Buy a song or depart." Bruder considered and then dropped a coin in the tin can beside the sign. That was a dime. "I know the sound of Lady Liberty," said the old man as he sat up and turned his sign around to reveal more writing on the back. "Starting fee, 1 drink." "I'll take a whiskey," said the old man, cracking his knuckles. Bruder shook his head and walked back to the bar to get the man his drink. Chapter 2. The Sheriff and the Backup Deputy. The wind howled around Brighthope Town Jail as Sheriff Franklin Hunt carefully removed a steaming kettle from the top of the roaring iron stove nestled in the corner near the empty jail cells. He was stocky and rugged, his gray beard trimmed neatly. He wore a navy blue suit and wore an ivory-handled pistol low on his hip. He was just sitting down at his desk with a steaming kettle when the front door swung open and an old man with a bushy beard and willowy hair walked in. He was tall, in his 70s, and he wore a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles at the end of his long nose. "Good evening, Sheriff," said the man. Hunt nodded. "Chicory?" "I was out on a ramble," Chicory said. He paused, wrinkling his nose. "That tea smells gruesome." "That's because it's soup," Hunt said. "Oh," Chicory said. "Can I have some? I haven't had a good meal today. Maybe not anything." "Please sit," Hunt said, indicating the chair on the other side of the desk. The old man smiled and joined him, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. Hunt grinned as he took 2 coffee mugs from a drawer and placed them on the desk beside the kettle. "I forgot to bring spoons. You think you can drink this without burning your mouth?" "Oh, I like challenges," Chicory said, smiling as Hunt poured them both some soup and handed one of the mugs to him. Chicory ran the cup under his nose and sighed in satisfaction. "It smells good now that I know it isn't supposed to be tea." "You need to make sure you have a couple good meals a day," Hunt scolded him. "I can't have my backup deputy pass out because he forgot to eat." The old man puffed his chest out at the mention of the title. "No, sir, that would be shameful." He lifted the mug to his lips and sipped the soup before Hunt could stop him, and then spat out a steaming mouthful onto the desk. Hunt shook his head. "It just came off the stovetop. Give it a minute to cool." Chicory pulled a handkerchief from his shift pocket and wiped up the mess. "It tastes like corn." "That's because it's corn chowder." Chicory nodded, blowing on the soup. "That makes sense. It's all coming together now." Hunt took a small sip of his own, chewed thoughtfully, and then leaned forward on the desk. "You were going to tell me about your ramble." "That's right," Chicory said. He paused to take a mouthful of the hot food and then continued. "Glad you remembered. I went out for a night ramble to get some clean air and set some fresh flowers on Nadine's grave. So I decided to go the long way round, a big circuit like a Sereno does on its patrol over in Spain. And when I do, I see this man in the perimeter, and Sheriff, I don't know him." Hunt sat up in his seat, all his attention on the deputy now. "Did he do anything, the stranger?" Chicory sat his mug down on the desk in front of him and interlaced his fingers over his flat stomach. It so happens he did. He changed his clothes, put his bag in a hole, covered it up, and went into town. Hunt put his own mug down beside Chicory's, frowning, deep in thought. Chicory continued. It is the official opinion of the backup deputy that his manner was suspicious. Hunt pulled his pocket watch from his vest pocket, checked the time, and stood. Where is he now? The learned goat, Chicory replied, standing as well. Why don't we go make a survey? Hunt suggested. Bruder leaned against the wall near the entrance, watching the tall man sitting uneasy on a stool in front of the bartender. Something about the newcomer set the dandy's teeth on edge, and Bruder had made a habit of paying attention to little signs like that. He thought it was the main reason he was still drawing breath while others were cold in the ground. Clarence met his eyes over the slumped man's head and then addressed him. What's your predilection? The tall man looked up as if he were surprised someone was speaking to him. His clothes seemed ill-fitted to his body, as if they belonged to a much bigger man. Looks like you could use something potent, Clarence said, or omnipotent. The stranger opened his mouth to speak, revealing a set of grungy teeth, and then just nodded. Clarence turned to grab a bottle marked with a pitchfork from a shelf behind him and poured 2 fingers' worth into a tumbler. My brother made this, the bartender said, sliding the glass to the man, who took it with trembling hands. It's like a tree fell on you, a redwood. The stranger started to lift the glass to his cracked lips, but froze when 2 figures walked through the saloon's batwing doors. Bruder nodded to Hunt and Chicory and then tilted his head towards the man at the bar. Hunt nodded back, and he and the deputy sidled up on either side of the vagrant. Clarence seemed less than thrilled with their presence. Things are slow enough without you two chasing people off. Hunt never took his eyes off the newcomer as he answered, We have business. Important business, Chicory echoed. The bartender took another look at the man before him, frowning, and then he slowly backed away. The man stared down into his drink. Good evening, Hunt said. The stranger glanced up, nodded, and then lowered his gaze back to the glass in his filthy hands. Hunt narrowed his eyes, put the fingers of his non-shooting hand to his lips. You aren't mute, are you? No, growled the younger man. Didn't your mother teach you any manners? Hunt asked. In civilized towns, places like Bright Hope, you look a man direct in the face when you talk to him. The dark-haired vagabond sighed and twisted around on the bar stool to stare up at Hunt's grizzled features. I didn't do anything. I'm just sitting here having a drink. I didn't say you did anything, Hunt replied. What's your name? A second of silence, and then the man proffered the name Buddy. Hunt raised one thick eyebrow. That took you a moment to recall, didn't it? My name is Buddy, the man answered, sounding more sure this time. Well, Buddy, Hunt said, why are you here? I'm supposed to meet someone. The sheriff pursed his lips, curious. Is that a fact? Tell me, what's today's date? The man furrowed his brow in confusion and didn't answer. Hunt continued. If you had a rendezvous scheduled, it seems like you'd know what day it is. The man remained silent, studying the lawman with shifty, petulant eyes. Hunt bladed his body, shifting his weight to his back foot as he made his next inquiry. Let me give you an easier question. Who'd you steal those clothes from? Fire blazed in the stranger's gray eyes. I didn't steal anything. Chicory waved for the other people in the bar to leave and then shifted closer to the man. Bruder stayed, pulling a cigar from inside his coat and lighting it. He saw Hunt rest the heel of his palm on his revolver's ivory handle. You're real angry for a guy named Buddy, Hunt observed. The man bristled. You've been squirting lemon in my eye since you came in here. I didn't commit no crime. And why are you talking about crime now? Hunt asked. Bruder exhaled a cloud of tobacco smoke and smiled. He enjoyed watching the sheriff work. Are you carrying a weapon? Hunt asked. A gun, knife, a letter opener with a sharp point, dynamite? The stranger looked like he would love nothing more than to spit in the sheriff's face as he replied, I ain't got no weapon. Hunt nodded to Chicory, and the old man moved towards the man, motioning for him to stand and lift his arms. Hunt gripped the handle of his pistol. If you move in a hasty manner, I'll put a bullet in you." The vagabond grimaced and stood to allow the old deputy to frisk him. Chicory was thorough, but the only thing he came up with was a small grimy cloth bag secured with a drawstring. This he handed over to the sheriff. "That's all he has." "Like I told you before," the stranger said, grinning, "I ain't got no weapons." Hunt did not return the smile. "Because you put 'em in that hole you dug?" The man's eyes grew wide as he realized he'd been caught. He spun to flee. Bruder saw a flash of movement, heard a bang, and the man collapsed at Chicory's feet with a new hole in his leg. His head struck the floor hard, bounced up, and came down a second time. His eyes rolled up to the whites, and he grew limp. "Damn," Bruder thought with a smile. "Hunt is fast with a shooting iron." Hunt holstered his smoking gun and motioned for Chicory to join him. "Grab an arm." Chicory nodded and moved to help. They lifted the unconscious man's upper body and began to drag him towards the saloon's front door, leaving a thin trail of blood in their wake. "Bruder," Hunt said as they drew near. "Sheriff." "Go rouse Doc Taylor and bring him to the jail," Hunt said. "Put some coffee in him if he's liquored up." Bruder held the batwing doors open so they could pass through with their burden, and then followed them out into the night. Somewhere out on the outskirts of town, a strange animal loosed an eerie, whistling cry that sent a shiver down the dandy's spine.
Okay, Slashaholics, this has been the Prologue, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 of Bone Tomahawk, written and narrated by Jeremy Terry. Hope you enjoyed it. I thought the prologue was quite creepy. I'm enjoying the story so far. Just like all of you, this is my first time experiencing it as well as I'm editing it together for Jeremy. I'll give a bigger, more detailed review when we get the unabridged version out. In the meantime, Jeremy and I hope you enjoy this. More chapters will be on the way. Until next time, this is your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening, be excellent to each other, and I'll see you soon. If you want to support the channel, subscribe, click the like button, click the bell, drop a comment, all that good stuff, spread the word. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can become a Patreon member, a channel member, you can get a cameo video, order one of my books or Jeremy's off of Amazon. All the information to do that is in the pinned comment description below. You can also do one-time tips through Cash App or PayPal. Again, all the information below. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.